That inspirational quote that you're about to add to your self-published book, using it could get your book banned from Amazon, cost you thousands in legal fees, or land you in court. And giving credit to the author isn't going to save you either. Most quotes are copyrighted, and if Amazon catches you telling them "I didn't know" isn't going to cut it. Now today, we're going to break down what is actually legal so that you can publish with confidence without worrying about KDP flagging your book or having legal action taken against you. Now, of course, I have to add a disclaimer here. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is just some general information that I have researched and rounded up, and I'm offering it to you so that you don't do anything that could jeopardize your publishing business. Now, if you have specific questions about specific quotes, specific books, that's a conversation for an actual lawyer. I also want to point out here that yes, there are a lot of people out there who are flouting the rules, and they seem to be getting away with it. We are not going to worry about them. We are just going to worry about ourselves. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's say that you want to use your favorite quote from, I don't know, Steve Jobs in your journal. You love it, it fits perfectly, but can you legally use it in your prompt book? Now, to find out, first we have to talk about intellectual property and copyright. Now, a quote is someone's intellectual property. That means that it is something that they created with their mind. And as soon as they record that idea in written, recorded, or typed out format, they own it, just like you would own a story or a drawing that you created. And as soon as they write it down or record it or type it out, it is automatically protected by copyright. Now, copyright protects the specific expression of ideas, not the ideas themselves. So in other words, you can be inspired by someone else's idea, but you can't copy the way that they said it. And crediting that author, that does not equal legal permission. Now, attribution is a great practice, but it doesn't give you the right to use someone else's work, especially if you're using it in a product that you plan to sell for commercial gain, like a book. Now, I want to just drive home that point one more time, because a lot of people ask, isn't it okay as long as I just give them credit? Now, giving them credit is not the same as getting permission, which is what you really need to do. It's kind of like borrowing someone's car and then saying, "Don't worry, I told everyone it's yours." It still doesn't belong to you. So the bottom line here is if you're using someone else's words in something that you plan to sell, like a prompt journal, you could be profiting off of their work, and they could demand you to stop, they could ask you for payment, or they could take legal action. Now, you might be familiar with the term fair use. Fair use is a rule that lets people use small parts of someone else's work without their permission, but it's only in certain situations, like if you're providing commentary or criticism, or if it's for educational or news reporting purposes. The problem is that fair use is subjective, and they look at it kind of like on a case-by-case basis. So there's no guaranteed protection. Now, fair use is a lot harder to claim than if you were, say, writing literary criticism, analyzing those quotes, right? You're not commenting on the quotes. You're using them for, in the case of the prompt journal, inspiration for commercial use. So my advice is don't rely on fair use as an argument if you're just creating a book full of inspirational quotes. It's just too legally risky. So when is it actually okay to use a quote? Firstly, if it's in the public domain. So this just means that the work's copyright has either expired or it didn't exist in the first place. So as of 2025, all works published in the United States in 1929 and earlier are now in the public domain. So think Shakespeare, Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, Jane Austen. Now it can and does get a little bit more complicated than that, and it also varies depending on whereabouts you live. So you should probably do a bit of a Google search how to determine if something is in the public domain, and then you can add your country to the end of that search query. Now, I've also linked to a bunch of sites that you can check to find out if something is in the public domain, so I hope you find that helpful. But you always want to double check before assuming something is in the public domain, especially if you're selling internationally, as copyright terms can vary by country. Now, if it's a book that you're quoting, it's pretty easy to check, but if it's something that someone just said, I would just assume that it's protected and move on. Now, quick note on Bible verses, if you wanted to use any of that material, the King James or the American Standard versions are both in the public domain. You're gonna need to check the copyright for any of the other versions because there's a million versions out there. Now, regarding AI quotes, you can use AI generated quotes in your books. Just keep in mind that you're not gonna be able to copyright them. Also remember that AI might accidentally paraphrase from a protected source. That is completely possible. So always double check if the quote that AI spits out at you sounds a little familiar. It's also okay to use a quote if it's a generic or a common phrase. Something like, think outside the box. These types of phrases are generally too simple to be copyrighted as literary works, but they can still be trademarked if they're used commercially. So a good example is Nike's Just Do It. And we're going to talk about trademarks in just a second, so stick around for that. Third is a quote that you wrote, obviously, or you have permission to use. So of course, the safest bet here is going to be writing your own quotes. If you're using someone else's, you've got to get explicit permission from the copyright holder. The copyright holder could be the author of the quote, it could be the publisher, or it could be the estate if that person is deceased. So when you're asking for permission, you want to be specific about how you're going to use it, what your book is, where it's sold, how you're going to use the book, how many copies, and all of this kind of information. Now, if you want some tips on how to go about getting permission to use a quote, stick around till the end. I'm going to be covering that. Firstly, let's get into when not to use a quote. Number one, obviously, if it's protected by copyright. So if it's in a form of a book, movie, a TV show, a song, a speech, a social media post, it is likely copyrighted. The copyright exists from the moment that the work is fixed in any tangible form, even if there's no copyright symbol. Number two, it's been trademarked. Now, a trademark, it's a type of legal protection for things that identify a brand, like its name, a logo, a slogan. This stops other people from using that same phrase or design in a way that could confuse customers. So we are to use the Nike example, just do it. And just to point out, a phrase can be both protected by copyright and trademark as well. Now, if you want to check if a phrase has been trademarked, head over to the USPTO database. I've linked to that below. And if you're in another country, you'll have to figure out where the trademarks in your country live online and check out that database. Okay, thirdly, the author is still alive or died less than 70 years ago. So examples, Brené Brown, Oprah, Maya Angelou, Tony Robbins. You want to avoid using quotes from any of these people without permission. And finally, very importantly, you're passing it off as your own. Never paraphrase or slightly reword a quote and then claim it as yours. That is plagiarism. It's still a copyright violation. So copyright protects the expression, as I said at the beginning, and if your version is a little bit too similar, you are still infringing on copyright, even if it's not exact. So how do we go about getting permission to use a quote that we desperately want to use in our book, like say a prompt book? If you found that perfect quote, you're willing to go through the process, here's how to do it. Step one, you need to find out who holds the copyright. Step two, you submit a formal permissions request. So you want to ask for permission in writing. You're going to send a short message or email explaining how you plan to use the quote. Step number three is to be prepared to negotiate. There's usually going to be a fee attached to this. The fees vary quite widely. Sometimes they're free, sometimes it's hundreds, sometimes it's thousands of dollars to get this permission, depending on how long the quote is, who wrote it, how you plan to use it, etc. Now, some rights holders are just going to say no outright. That is their right. Step number four, you need to get that permission in writing. Now, you probably noticed this is a lot of work for a self-published author. This is why traditional publishers have entire legal teams to take care of this type of thing. For us self-published authors, especially if your book has a lot of quotes, getting permission to use each quote can get really expensive, totally overwhelming pretty fast. So that is why many authors choose to write their own quotes or stick exclusively to public domain sources. So a couple of final bonus tips for you, just so you can stay legal. Firstly, don't rely on Pinterest, Instagram, or quote sites. These sites, they often do not check who owns the copyright. They certainly don't have permission to use it. Now, the copyright holder, they're probably not going to go after them, but if you're publishing a book that stands to make a profit, you are going to be much more likely to be considered worth pursuing. If you're in doubt, just leave it out. It is not worth the legal risk. Secondly, even when you can legally use a quote, like if it's from the public domain, you always want to credit the source to avoid plagiarism and maintain credibility. Remember that copyright terms vary by country, so a quote that's in the public domain in the US might still be protected elsewhere. And then going specifically back to our prompt journal example, understand that your collection of inspirational quotes is considered commercial use, which makes that fair use argument pretty weak. You're not analyzing the quotes, you're not offering any commentary on them, you're using them to sell a product. Now, the bottom line to all of this here, if you're not sure whether you can use a quote, ask an intellectual property lawyer. If a lawyer is not in your budget, then just don't use it. Now, we've been talking a lot about public domain works, and if you want to learn how to generate passive income publishing public domain works on Amazon KDP the right way, because there's definitely a right way to do it, watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.